And every week you're going to their class and you're assisting their classes, you absorb their energy. And this mentorship, and learning to assist is much more than learning correct hands-on adjustments. It's observing how these teachers read the room, where they direct their energy, how they hold their energy. And it's such a slow process that when you're with them for a certain period of time, you absorb that.
Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day wherever you are as you're listening to this week's episode. I am back in Long Beach and enjoying my slower weekend, which is very, very well needed. Some of you know that I've been training for a full marathon, so I am officially, I think, on week 6 of my training, and it's going great. It's nice to train for something rather than just to work out or exercise to stay fit or to stay healthy. It's nice to have a goal. Even though I'm not trying to race this marathon for a specific time, I don't really care for time. I just want to run healthy and enjoy the process of training and running with my sister. So that's kind of my goal. But it's kind of fun to follow a training program and witness myself mentally and physically slowly adapting to be able to run longer distance. So that's been really fun for me. Definitely little soreness and aches and pains happening in my body, not in a bad way. So yoga has been very helpful to balance that out. But at the same time, with so many trainings, it's becoming harder to find time for my yoga practice as well. So trying to figure out all that balance. And I think that's what yoga is about, finding balance. I do have a couple of announcements before we get to our episode of the week. Well, first of all, if you're new to this podcast, welcome. I'm glad you are here. And if you are a returning listener, welcome back. I'm so happy that you continue to come back to listen to this episode. I appreciate you so much. If you're new to this podcast, Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast was born because I've been teaching yoga full-time for some time. And I always wanted to hear the stories of other full-time yoga teachers to see how are they making it work. When I first became a teacher, I wasn't sure if it was possible to be a full-time yoga teacher. And I just wanted to ask so many questions to other full-time yoga teachers. So that's kind of why I started this podcast, because I wanted to have other full-time yoga teachers' stories and journeys and experiences out there in the world for people to hear, to share with the world that it is possible to be a full-time yoga teacher, but it's also not easy. And we all have such a unique way to make this lifestyle and career work. And a lot of us do it because we really love it. And I just want to showcase how different everyone's paths are. And they're all unique and beautiful on its own. So, welcome to the podcast if you're new. Some of the announcements I want to make is, first of all, I am teaching my first SmartFlow 200-hour teacher trainings. I have taught other 200-hour teacher training, but my first SmartFlow 200-hour teacher training early next year from February to May in Orange County at a studio called Live Meta in Laguna Niguel. It is every other weekend format, and it's going to be from February to May. I'll be co-teaching it with another amazing teacher named Shanti. And I am so excited to teach SmartFlow 200-hour. If you want to know what SmartFlow is, if I can sum it up quickly, it is a alignment-based, very intelligently thought through vinyasa class. If I could go back in time, I would take my 200 hours with SmartFlow. And that's what a lot of people say when they discover SmartFlow much later in life, in their teaching or yoga student life. So if you want to start off with a really great foundation, SmartFlow 200-hour teacher training is a great one for you. So if you know somebody or you yourself are interested in taking a SmartFlow 200-hour teacher training, it's happening next year, February to May in Orange County. It is all in person. Next announcement I want to make is that I am so excited that my 4-year anniversary is coming up for my online yoga studio. I started my online yoga studio during the pandemic in 2020, and it's still going. And I'm so happy and grateful to have my online community. And every year in November, I celebrate my online yoga studio. This year is a little bit special because I'm hosting two celebrations. One is in-person celebrations happening in Long Beach. It'll be outdoor in the park. And that celebrations will be me teaching yoga. And I'm bringing on my friend Carlos, who's going to play sound bath the whole time I'm teaching yoga. So there'll be live music and nice juicy sound bath shavasana at the end. And I'm going to share a cacao drink that I'm going to make from pure cacao I brought back from Peru. It's going to be yummy. So that's happening November 3rd, Sunday, from 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. in California, Long Beach. Link is going to be on the show notes. If you don't live in Long Beach or Southern California and still want to celebrate, I still want you to come celebrate my online celebrations, because it is an online studio that we're celebrating. I have students from all over the world. So if you want to come and celebrate the online celebration, that is happening November 2nd, Saturday, from 9 a.m. until 10 a.m. California time. So that'll be 12 Eastern time until 1 o'clock Eastern time. And we'll practice yoga together on Zoom. There'll be little gratitude meditation at the end, and there'll be fun raffles and giveaways at the end. So it's all free to sign up, both the in-person and online celebrations. Donations are welcome to help support the funding that goes into organizing these events, but it's not required. So I hope to see you there. Listeners out there, I would love to meet you, or maybe I already know you. So don't be shy. Come to my online celebrations or in-person celebrations. I would love to see you there. Last announcement I want to make is a upcoming workshop that I'm doing. I'm not teaching it, but it's a workshop called Art of Teaching Private Yoga. And this workshop is geared towards yoga teachers, and it's going to be taught by Brittany. And Brittany, I interviewed Brittany towards the very beginning of this podcast journey. And she has a thriving private yoga business where her career is solely built around teaching private yoga. She's a certified yoga therapist, yoga teacher, as well as Pilates teacher. And she has really nailed down how to teach private yoga in a skillful and mindful way. So you are going to learn in this workshop how to empower your clients in one-on-one yoga sessions. The workshop will give you a deep dive into basic intake interviewing skills, how to tailor sessions to the needs of your client, and how group classes are different than private sessions. She's also going to focus on the importance of meeting clients where they are, and yoga teacher skills to help clients feel seen, heard, and honored in their personal yoga journey. And on top of that, we'll briefly cover logistical issues of private practice, such as scheduling, pricing, intake forms, liability, scope of practice, and when to refer out to other practitioners. So there'll be Q&A sessions, so come with questions. I'm so excited that I will be there asking probably so many questions to Brittany. So I'm so excited that she's going to be teaching this workshop. I can't think of anybody else who's better suited to teach this workshop. So I hope you can make it. That's Sunday, November 3rd from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time, which will be 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. The link to register for that workshop will also be on the show notes. It is $35, 2 hours. If you can't make it live, the recordings will be sent out to you. All right, I think that's all the logistical stuff before I get to this week's podcast episode. This week's podcast episode is so important. No, I would say it's so special to me because I interviewed my teacher, Joan Hyman, and she has been on the list of people I want to interview from way before I even started this podcast. But I was a little too hesitant and scared to ask her until now. So I finally asked her and she said, yes, thank you, Joan. I know she is such a busy yoga teacher, traveling and teaching trainings all over the world. But that is why I look up to her so much. She has built this amazing yoga business and yoga school. She travels and she lives part-time in Europe and other time in the United States, California. She lead yoga retreats all over the world in the most beautiful places, and she has community all over the world. And I have actually gone to India to train with her for 2 weeks. It was advanced yoga teacher training, 150 hours. I did it in Goa with her, I think close to 2 years ago. She was part of my 300-hour teachers in my 300-hour program at YogaWorks. Just an amazing, real deal, authentic teacher, a real authentic teacher. And I have huge respect for her. And I know a lot of people, a lot of yoga teachers look up to her. So I'm just so excited that I got to speak to her and I get to share her journey, her stories. And she just has so much wisdoms to share. And I just get so inspired every time I listen to her speak. So thank you, Joan, so much for coming on to this podcast to share your story. So this is a little bit about Joan. Joan Hyman is the founder of the School of Yoga, an international teacher training program focused on continuing education. With over 20 years of experience, Joan blends Ashtanga and Iyengar methods with Ayurveda and meditation, creating a grounded teaching style that deeply aligns and transforms her students. Originally from Philadelphia, she earned a degree in exercise science and transitioned from a dance career to yoga, studying with a renowned teacher in India and the US. Joan's open-hearted approach and passion for the yogic lifestyle guides her retreats, trainings, and classes, helping students explore both their inner and outer worlds. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Joan, and I will speak to you on the other side. Welcome, Joan, for coming to join me on the Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm so happy that I get to have this conversation with you. Like I said earlier before I press record, you have been somebody that I've been wanting to interview for a really long time, and you're definitely a yoga teacher that I'm really, really inspired by. So I'm so happy that we get to find this time to talk today. So how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm in Europe. I live part-time in Brussels. And I got here last week, so I've really had some time to relax. And I'm feeling calm right now. It's a nice feeling.
And are you all adjusted to a time zone difference already?
I am. I was really tired, and when I got to Europe, I missed my connecting in New York, so I got here a day late, and then I had to fly to Geneva to start a training. So you can imagine when I got back on Monday, and it's Thursday now, I was extremely exhausted. So I've really had these past few days to just relax, unwind, catch up on some computer work, practice. I got some acupuncture. So yeah, I'm feeling good.
I'm so glad you're making sure you get time to do this kind of self-care work. I'm sure it's very necessary, especially as for you who travels quite a bit and teach in different places.
Yeah. Traveling is great. But as you know, it's exhausting.
Yeah. Maybe tell the listener, where are you originally from and how did you start this yoga journey?
Well, I'm originally from Philadelphia. That's where I grew up at. And I was definitely a hyperactive kid. I was rebellious. I was a dancer. And my mother was always trying to get me to learn how to channel my energy. So she put me in ballet classes when I was younger, and that really worked. And I was, I love dancing, and I grew up in Philadelphia, so I would go down to the city a lot, and there was all these great classes I can take. And even when I was a teenager, I would start going up to New York. So the availability to dance was all around me, and I loved moving my body, but I was still getting in trouble a lot. So my cousin, who became like an older sister, like a mother figure to me, she had gifted me some yoga packages I remember it was at a bookstore in South Philadelphia, and it was called The Garlands of Letters. And back then there wasn't really any yoga studios. This was in the 80s. So everything was like in a church, or people would just rent space. And it was Shivananda. So if you know anything about Shivananda, it's very much like you do the pose, you take Shavasana, you do Nadi Shodhana, and it was very slow. And I think I was 21 at the time, and it was just too slow for me. So I was really kind of turned off by it. And then I had moved to New York shortly after, and boyfriend that I was seeing at the time said, you should check out Jiva Mukti. That's more your style. You're moving more. And back then they had the Jiva Mukti was in the East Village right next to the L train. So it just had this vibe. Like there was 60 people in a room. You'd hear the L train continue to go by throughout the classes, all of the chanting, but the energy was really contagious. And I got hooked right away. And I remember I was also leading a very unhealthy lifestyle at the time. And that was the first time that I really felt my body, like I felt my organs, and I felt like I needed to purge and detoxify. And that was much different because I had always been dancing, which was so physical, but something was much different about yoga asana that made me really feel the inside of my body. So that moment really planted a seed for me to start changing my lifestyle.
And you were a dancer, and was that your job at the time in New York? You were earning money. That was your career as a dancer?
Yeah, I mean, I was auditioning and I was working. I was also teaching fitness. So I've always taught. I started teaching when I was 15 years old. You know, my parents didn't have a lot of money. And so for all of the things that we wanted to do, like take dance classes or just buy clothes, we had to pay for it. Well, fitness was more of a side thing. My dancing was really my true love, but the teaching always supplemented my income. And when I look back, because I didn't want to go into the fitness world, but I think, you know, what my path was I was really meant to be a teacher. So even though I was a dancer and I was definitely getting jobs and I was making money with it, I was always teaching at the same time. And then later I started teaching dance as well too. And it wasn't until I was probably like 27, 28, I started teaching yoga.
And what sparked your interest to become a yoga teacher?
Well, after, you know, I left New York and I moved to Las Vegas. I got a show in Las Vegas. This is kind of a wild turn of events. And during the day, I found this yoga studio that was in walking distance to my house. And in Las Vegas at the time, the popular studios were hot yoga studios, Bikram studios. And so I started going to this Bikram studio, and I would do the Bikram series before I would go into my show at night. And I remember in my show, a lot of my colleagues were like, "Oh, can you teach us a warm up?" Because they knew I was teaching dance and fitness and everything. So I was like, "All right, well, why don't I start teaching some yoga into this, into this warm up?" So it was kind of like a combination of dance and yoga at the same time, and it was something that came very natural to me. And then, during this time, Bikram didn't really do it for me. I really had loved Jiva Mukti and more of that vinyasa flow element. I was doing Bikram because it was available. I mean, it definitely made you feel detoxed, but I just wanted something deeper. And so somebody had recommended the David Swenson book. That book had just come out, and it was the Ashtanga book, and it had the primary series and the second series. And so me and a couple teachers from that Bikram studio started doing the primary series and just learning it on our own. I have very long limbs, very open hamstrings. So a lot of it came easy to me, except for Lotus. I have tight hips. And then somebody had told me to check out Yoga Works in Santa Monica, California. And this was probably about 2002. So it was still the early days. And when Mati Zirati was teaching there. And I took a trip to LA, and I decided to just walk in cold to this Ashtanga class. And little did I know, I didn't know this at the time, but all these big league teachers were in that class, like Annie Carpenter, Sean Korn. I always remember Charles James, and I don't know if you know him, but he was like a staple in that room. And I remember seeing this, and the Shakti was so strong. I got so intimidated, I walked out. And then the next day, this friend of mine told me to come back, and she would come with me so I'd feel a little bit more comfortable. And I met Mati. And that's when I really felt like I met my teacher, and my whole body tingled. And then I left. I went back to Vegas to do my show, and I realized another seed had been planted. And I was like, I want to teach full time, and I want to move to LA and study with this woman. And that's exactly what I did. The next year, I did the Yoga Works teacher training in 2002. And shortly after, I started teaching. And that's when I became more of a full-time yoga teacher, and I started to commit to it.
So meeting Mati in that Ashtanga room really ignited a fire in you that you wanted to become a full-time teacher. And was Mati teaching and I guess facilitating or managing the Ashtanga room Mysore style at Yoga Works during that time?
Well, yeah, she was running Yoga Works. So it was her business, and she was definitely like the queen. And what Mati was known for was she was great at creating teachers. And she was also a really good businesswoman. So Yoga Works was a very, very successful studio. Everybody in LA knew of Yoga Works. And there was two Yoga Works, one in Montana and one at Main Street. And so, yeah, this is something like you wanted to be a part of. It's where, like, if you wanted to be a yoga teacher, you needed to be in that scene. So I moved to LA and, I'm pretty full on. When I do something 110%. So I moved to Los Angeles and I did the teacher training with Mati and Lisa Walford. And then I really committed to the Mysore room. And, 2 years later, I started assisting her. And then a year later, I started teaching. And back in the day, because the yoga community was much smaller, I mean, they really mentored you. Like I would have meetings with Lisa and Mati and really learn like personalized assist. And then, you're also watching someone like Annie Carpenter kind of come up and you have all these great teachers that really became like the leaders in the yoga world, like right at your fingertips. So as a baby teacher, I mean, you can imagine this was amazing for me. And I knew I had stepped on an entire brand new path. And that was filled with a lot of juice. And I was very excited about it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have so many questions about that. It sounds such an exciting time to be there. And I'm curious, what was a 200-hour like back then for you taking it? Because I've taken Yoga Works 200 hours in 2016 or 17, and I'm sure it was maybe quite different when you took it in 2002.
Well, the manual was this small. So which is like, it was a tiny little pamphlet and it was like just basic drawings. And, we would meet for about 5 hours a day. It was a weekend training. And literally it was all practice. I mean, they would keep us in practice for 3 hours. We'd have a half-hour break. And then we literally spend the last 90 minutes just talking about the pose we did today. And on Friday nights, we would have philosophy with either Lisa or Mati. So it was very straightforward. There was no frills. I think the anatomy is something that kind of came into the training. I think especially when Annie started teaching and then a lot of different people got their hands on it. But I think the very blueprint of the Yoga Works teacher training was just asana, philosophy from the Yoga Sutras, and the importance of practice.
And how long was the 200 hours? How many months or weeks did it take?
3 months. It was a weekend training. So I'm guessing it was probably 3 weekends a month or 4 weekends a month. Yeah.
Wow. And with Lisa coming from Iyengar background and maybe Mati, I know she has both Iyengar and Ashtanga background, but was it a nice combination and like influence of the two?
It was great. I definitely resonated with Mati at the time because she was so dynamic. And also, I have a very short attention span. And so Mati really just caught me. Lisa was a slow burn. And actually, Lisa is my ex about things and she curates and she comes up with these trainings. It's really next level. And so, yeah, I was really fortunate to have these two ladies as my 200-hour teacher trainings, trainers. And then even afterwards, I assisted both of them. There wasn't a 300-hour program at Yoga Works then. So afterwards, you just assisted one of your teachers.
Yeah. And I'm actually curious about the assisting part because I feel like maybe that's not as prevalent anymore in the yoga world that I'm seeing. We kind of just go straight into teaching after teacher training. And I love that there was a lot of assisting that you did. Were you assisting their group classes? Like for Lisa, it was a Iyengar class. And for Mati, was it a Mysore style Ashtanga class that you were assisting?
Yeah, exactly. So, assisting is such an important part of learning how to teach. And, basically, though, I wasn't even allowed to really touch anybody. Like in the Mysore rooms, Mati was like, just teach the beginners. And I wasn't even allowed to talk. If I was talking too loud, she would look at me and do this with her hand. And I was really there to teach the people that didn't know the sun salutations, didn't understand downward dog. But I became a really good teacher because of that, because she really put me with people that were so new to the practice. And then she would oversee everything that I was doing. So, I mean, she was very wise like that. And as far as the experienced people, you just didn't touch them. Lisa, I mean, I literally just observed, and I was only allowed to do little basic poses, little basic adjustments like child's pose, Supta Padangustasana. And then after both classes, I would meet with them and they would give me some feedback. Even to this day, I still have students come in and assist me, but it's a really tricky thing. The world of yoga is a little different right now. Back then, too, everybody took their time. Things move slower, where I think right now in the day and age we're at, everything is moving so fast. And so it's really hard to get consistency. Like, even though I have a mentorship group, like, they might only be able to assist once a month, or, here, it's very touch and go. So it's really hard. And it's not just, there's a whole energy that forms when you're with your teacher day in and day out. And every week you're going to their class and you're assisting their classes. You absorb their energy. And this mentorship, and learning to assist is much more than learning correct hands-on adjustments. It's observing how these teachers read the room, where they direct their energy, how they hold their energy. And it's such a slow process that when you're with them for a certain period of time, you absorb that. Does that make sense? So it doesn't come from up here. It's really coming from, the love of the practice.
Yeah. No, I love that. I feel like when I did 300 with Yoga Works before the pandemic, there was quite a few hours we have to observe and assist our mentor as part of our hours to graduate. And it was I learned so much and David Lynch was my mentor. So I'm walking around or just sitting in the back of his room, just watching him. I've learned so much. And imagining if I did that for a couple years with one teacher, several teachers, how much I would have gained from that experience. So that sounds amazing. And I feel like it's something that I wish there was more of that in the yoga world today. But like you said, people are busier now, and it's hard to commit to hours and hours and hours of observing and assisting. But from your when you started assisting Mati and Elisa, when did you start teaching? Like, did they tell you when they felt like, okay, you're ready to take on a class to teach on your own?
I started teaching right away. Like I said, it was like teaching was always there. And I'm 51 right now, and I started teaching at 15, and it wasn't always yoga, but I was always teaching. Like, if you ask my father, he's like, yeah, she's just always taught. And so it was something that just always was there for me. But, coming into Yoga Works, and, I had heard that Lisa and Mati both thought I was very green, and I was really fresh and new on the path. So, yeah, they put me in newer studios. I had to work hard to get the bigger time slots. But I think one thing that they both liked about me, especially Mati saw this in me, was I was very dedicated. And I showed up every single day. And back then, Mati, before she gave you a class, she wanted to see your practice. And it's interesting because today they have these auditions, and she didn't care about that. She was because your practice, drives your teaching. So she had wanted to see our practice and how dedicated, the teacher was to their practice. And so I think because she had seen that, and I was in those Mysore rooms every day, she knew that I was malleable, that she could work with me. And she did send some people to my classes. She observed me a lot. And I even remember when I went up for my Yoga Work certification, Lisa Walford, she felt like my instruction can improve. And that's why I had to assist her for 6 months. And I had to take the Iyengar classes. And she's the one who eventually handed me my Yoga Work certification, because I had to teach in front of her again. And then I went to Mysore to study with Patabi Joyce. So you can see back then, there was some... Little did I know how big the path that I was embarking on was, but it's something that was such a unique time. Yeah. And I just don't think we have that anymore in the time that we live in now.
Oh, sounds like such a beautiful time, and like you gained such an amazing experience that's very hard for teachers this age to be able to experience that. So I love hearing that story. I feel like it just makes me really smile listening to it. And so when you were kind of assisting and keep pursuing this path of becoming a yoga teacher, what was the other job that you had that you were able to kind of sustain your life so you could keep pursuing yoga?
Well, like I said, back in New York, and even when I was teaching yoga before I had the YogaWorks teacher training, I hate to say this, but I was teaching bad yoga. It was like dance yoga. So I was still supplementing my teaching with dancing gigs. I would teach some fitness stuff. I was also a fit model. I would do a little bit of modeling. But I was also in my 20s, and it wasn't until I was in my early 30s. When I look back now, I was still super young. And I really decided to just throw balls to the wall and just become a yoga teacher. And I didn't have anything else to supplement my income. In the very first year, I was still dancing. But the issue in LA is all of the dancing jobs, like the auditions and the agents, they're all in the valley. And back then, all the yoga was in Santa Monica. And it was two complete different energies. Like if I would go to a dance audition and then I'd have to teach a yoga class, it was really hard to switch gears. So I knew I just had to let it go. And that's what I did. I just let the dancing world go and I absorbed myself in the yoga. I mean, that's how much I loved yoga. And I decided to do it full time. And I was one of those teachers that I said yes to every sub opportunity. Very quickly, early on, I picked up a ton of privates in LA. And I think I have a good ability to connect and talk with people. And LA is a town built off of connections. And also back then, it was much easier to get work. I know how hard it is to become a yoga teacher these days. But back then, like at Equinox, I used to teach at some of the gyms in New York. And then somebody knew me from Equinox, Petra Colbert, and she's like, "Do you want to teach at Equinox on Sunset?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then because it was in such a high income area, right where the Hollywood Hills are, I picked up a ton of privates. And so it really flowed very easy for me because it was such a different time. I mean, I literally got here before Equinox was here. And I opened the first Equinox on Sunset, and I still remember those teachers that were teaching there. That we all like Kevin, who's now Light, like he was teaching meditation, and so that's what I mean. It was a really special time before it really became mainstream.
Yeah, and because it was before yoga became mainstream, was being a full-time teacher a not very common thing? There was maybe very few people who were actually doing it. And another question is like, how many classes a week do you think you were teaching in average to kind of be able to live and survive with full-time yoga teaching?
Yes, first of all, it was not mainstream. And it was kind of looked at like, oh, you must be a hippie. And I remember when I first came to LA, this is how I thought I made it. Yeah, and I was still in my young 30s. I remember I was teaching like probably 8 classes a week. I had a handful of privates and I was making $1,300. And to me, I was like, I made it. I can get a 1-bedroom apartment. I have a car. And this was also, back when rent was a lot cheaper than it is now too. So yeah, but I was teaching pretty much a full-time schedule, I would say right away.
Wow. And I know you said you were teaching private and group classes. Do you have a preference even now, whether you like teaching private more or group classes more?
Well, I think I love teaching group classes like most people because there's an energy that you can really connect into, especially when all your students are kind of, in that flow. I do like privates because I also have an anatomy background. I went to school for exercise science. My mother was a nurse. So there's something in me that is a little bit more medically inclined. And I have a good eye for reading bodies. So I do like teaching privates and I'm good at it. But I don't like driving around LA. And sometimes, there's a lot of interesting dynamics that happen with private. So you really, now if I teach privates, it's only 1 or 2 a week. So it's a little bit more special. My energy doesn't get pulled as much. But back in the day when I was younger and I was teaching 6 to 8 privates a week, I was drained. That was a little too much.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I know you mentioned a little while ago that you went to Mysore, India to study with Patabi Joy. So I want to hear about that story and also how the traveling started to come into your teaching life.
Well, I like traveling. And as a dancer, I was a traveler. But when I had moved to LA, I knew I needed to build. And I think from teaching fitness in New York, that gave me an understanding of how to build a class. Hang out at the studio, put all your eggs in one basket. Don't spread yourself too thin. Get to know the community. Take the teachers' classes that you want to teach. So I was really good with understanding how to build. And so I really committed, I would say 5 years in LA where I wasn't traveling. And then, yeah, when I got my yoga work certification, kind of as a big reward, I went to my sort of study with Patabi Joyce. And I had been pulled to go to India. I was very nervous about it. But once again, that was a very special time because that was, I would say, right before Patabi Joyce got sick. So he was still healthy. I had a really good friend over there named Heather Duplex, who a lot of people know as Radha. And she was also a bit of a mentor to me. And she hooked me up with this great apartment right around the corner from the Shala. I don't know how this happened, but I got a 5 a.m. time slot, which is one of the best time slots you can get. And I was practicing with a lot of old school Ashtangi yogis, Patabi Joyce. So it was pretty amazing. Like I said, I was still a newbie at the time, but I loved it. It was like yoga camp. I mean, you just practice really hardcore in the morning. You take Sanskrit classes, philosophy classes, and it's really social. I mean, you meet people from all over the world. And I came back with that bug. I wanted to go back. And it wasn't until a few years later, I went back and I studied with Sharat. I didn't vibe with the Sharat vibe. And this is right when he took over. And it just wasn't my cup of tea. So I left and I traveled around India. And that's when I started to really form a relationship with India. Now, right around that time, being the Ashtangi, I started to go to Bali and I started to go to Hawaii, these far off places to study with these teachers, to take a break from teaching. And Yoga Works had these things called exports, which were these yoga teacher trainings. And in 2009, this kind of all happened like right after I got my certificate. Annie Carpenter went to bat for me and she said, we should bring Joan into the yoga teacher training department. And so I assisted Annie. She gave me a great recommendation. And not only did they give me a training in LA, but they offered me a training in the Philippines. And they had known that I've been going to India. And so they were like, well, maybe she can go to India and then she can go over to the Philippines. And also in the Philippines, the market was Ashtanga yoga. And so that was something that was very unique to me. I was really into this Ashtanga thing. So I said yes. And I went to Manila, Philippines, taught my first teacher training. And then I went back a year later. That crew that I taught the second time around opened a studio in Manila. And not only that, they started hooking me up with other places in Asia. So when I would go to Manila to teach, I would stop in Singapore or Hong Kong. And then the Asian Yoga Conference, it was like, okay, she's from America. Let's bring her over. So Asia was easy, and a lot of people actually, a lot of Westerners actually do really well teaching in Asia. And then to follow that up, maybe a year or two later, a studio in Geneva, Switzerland, wanted to bring the YogaWorks teacher training over. They looked at the rosters of teachers and they're like, well, Joan Hyman, she seems like she's traveling around the world. She's easy. I didn't have a relationship then. I didn't have a dog. It was easy to sublet my apartment. So I got this teacher training in Geneva. And that stuck. And since then, I've been going back every single year since 2012. I remember those students become teachers. They open their studios and other studios start to get to know you. So that spread as well, too. And so that's kind of how it happened. It happened around 2010 to 2012. It happened very organically. And YogaWorks gave me the launching pad.
Mm. And when you went to Mysore to practice Ashtanga with Patabi Joyce, since you were kind of going on your own, you weren't being asked to do a training or it wasn't for work. Did you have to just get a long-term sub for all of your classes back in LA and go, or did you have to kind of lose those classes once you left?
No, and I still do this. I get a sub. My numbers do drop, but I think what saves me is when I come back, my numbers do increase. The studios don't like it, but I think they, at this point of the game, I think they've just surrendered. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Yeah.
But in terms of it was Yoga Works at the time, Yoga Works were sending you to go teach, so they kind of almost had to be, flexible and be okay with somebody else
Totally.
subbing your classes while you're gone.
And I see this with everybody, like even with teachers like you that want to travel. I mean, the studio doesn't like it, but I think if you pull in numbers and you're a respectable teacher, they're going to have to make do because they understand that yoga teachers have a free spirit. A lot of yoga teachers need to go and study somewhere,
Mhm.
and it's just the nature of the game, the yoga world. It's not a linear world, and I think yoga teachers are just yoga studios are just having to work with this these days.
Yeah. And I'm also curious about this is slightly, I have more questions I want to ask about your, teacher trainings jobs. But before that, I'm curious back then, how was applying to go to Mysore like? Like, is that something you had to get like a letter from your Ashtanga teacher to apply to get accepted to go to Mysore? Like, what was that process like?
These days, you need that.
Uh,
Back then, I just had to pay $600 for the month. That was it. I just had to apply. It wasn't like I think these days when he opens it up, you have like 24 hours to get your application in. It
yeah.
was easy. I just had to send apply on the application, and then I had to give him a bunch of rupees. Yeah, and that very first day, you go in because they didn't have credit cards back then. And I think 600 US dollars was like a stack of rupees, like this big. And I just handed him a bunch of rupees.
And it was $600 per month. And did you stay for 3 months?
I stayed for 2.5 months.
Two and a
And
half.
then the last 2 weeks, I went to Sri Lanka.
Wow. I'm sure it was such a different time because now when I see on Instagram what the Mysore room looks like, where Shrath runs the Mysore room, it looks like a huge gymnasium and there's hundreds of people practicing it. And I'm sure it was different back then.
Yeah, there's 500 people in the room.
Wow. And how many were in the room when you practiced?
I would say like 40 or 50. It was still full. But
Mhm.
also, I think something that turned me off the second time around, and I've spoken to people that practice with Sharad about this, was the waiting. It's really common, like, and I had gotten a later time slot that you sit and you wait sometimes an hour to do your practice. And then also it's so big. And I think these days that there's so many different assistants and it's just really hard to get that attention. Like you come all the way, you come, so far to study with the master. You want to make sure that, you have some relationship with the master. But I think these days it's quite hard.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So now I wanted to ask you a little bit about starting to get involved in Yoga Works teacher training. How long were you teaching before you were asked to assist your first 200? I think you said you assisted Annie Carpenter's.
Yeah, so if I look at the dates, 2002, I started teaching at Yoga Works, and that's when I graduated my training. And it was 2008. So what is that, 6 years?
Yeah.
6 years. Like I said, I think I didn't really start traveling until, like I took baby trips, but I think and I took my Mysore trip was 2006. But then it wasn't until 2008, 2009 that the traveling started really kind of unfolding. So,
Mhm.
so I really spent 6 years in LA just, doing the grind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, it was Natasha Rosopoulos too, who also used to run the trainings. And first I assisted James and then I assisted Annie, James Brown.
And is that something like somebody will ask you, they rather than you applying, they're like, I think Joan would be, she's ready or she would be great assistant, and they kind of invite you to come assist?
Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't want to do it. I thought it was very sterile. And remember, like I had just gone back from Mysore, and there was just like this juice, and I was practicing at all these like real traditional shalas. And I saw the YogaWorks teacher training, and I was just like, and then I remember Natasha sat down with me, and she's like, "Well, it's a great way for you to consolidate your energy, so you're not running around LA teaching all these privates." And then she told me how much money I would make. And I was like, okay. And then there was travel opportunities in there for me. So I was like, okay, I can make this work. And to be honest, when I started assisting, right away, I was hooked. Like another seed was planted. I was like, I really like this. To
Mm.
work with students that are really serious about yoga. I mean, this is a great way to teach.
Yeah. And how many teacher trainings do you think you assisted before they were like, okay, you're ready to lead your own?
Just two. I think the one with Annie, that was, Annie, she's so hardcore. I was the lead, so I had to teach a little bit. And also, I had just ended a 2.5 year relationship like the day before the training started. And I remember, Annie was like, I'm really sorry to hear that, but now you really have to focus. And that's what I did. And I really just absorbed, once again, that word absorbed myself. It was a month-long teacher training, and Kia Miller was the other teacher. It was a great group, and it was actually Annie's last teacher training at YogaWorks. So it really had a momentum and an energy to it. And yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, I got really lucky. I've had great teachers like Mati and Lisa to do my 200-hour with, and then to assist Annie on a 200-hour. I mean, Annie really teaches you how to become a great teacher trainer. And it was really great that I had the opportunity to observe her, in the way she led a training before I started leading trainings.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I almost like, I assisted Annie's 200 earlier this year, and she says she doesn't want to do another one. And I almost wish like there was like 2 or 3 more trainings that I could just be assisting her to like really learn more from her and absorb more from her. But I don't know if she would lead another. Right now, for now, she says she's not leading any more 200. But I wish there was more opportunity like that to be able to assist Annie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you started teaching your 200-hour teacher training, and that kind of opportunity led you to travel around different part of the world teaching teacher training, I know it came a time for you that you left YogaWorks. So I kind of want to know that transition of like taking another leap, I guess, in your teaching career.
Well, everything comes to an end. I mean, we learn that change is the only thing that's constant in yoga. And so after 15 years, things were just getting stale at YogaWorks. And a lot of the big teachers left, management changed, YogaWorks totally multiplied. There was like 35 studios. So it was really losing, in my opinion, it was losing a lot of their juice, their Shakti. And I was getting bored teaching the YogaWorks method, because that was the only thing about teaching another training. You're kind of really under an umbrella of, well, if YogaWorks says it's this way, it's that way. So I was starting to get a little antsy with that. And then I had started like kind of teaching at some festivals. And of course, Wanderlust caught my eye. And, Wanderlust this was around 2013, 2014. Wanderlust was like the big festival. And I managed to get in and teaching a festival. And this was, they have different tiers at Wanderlust. And I really kind of came in once again as like a newbie, but I just really wanted to be in that energy, to be in that world. I remember my classes, I really got a lot of good response. And the person who ran Wanderlust at the time came up to me during the festival, and he said, "We're getting a lot of great feedback from you. It's good to meet you." But that was it. And I just remember thinking, oh, a seed has been planted. This feels really good. And then a year later, Skylar Grant, who owned Kula Yoga in New York, wanted to open, actually, she was buying Gurmukh Studio in Hollywood, and they needed yoga teachers. And so she was asking around, and she wanted to know who the popular yoga teachers in LA were. And so my name came up. And so, I mean, she really pursued me because she knew I had been so entrenched at YogaWorks. And I loved teaching at Center for Yoga. Like, it was really hard for me to leave those rooms. And my classes were full. Like, do you know how hard it is to leave students that you've had for 15 years? I wouldn't leave just to go teach group classes. So we kind of came up with this whole contract. And what was appealing to me, she said that I can curate the teacher trainings, meaning that I could, they already had manuals that, other teachers have written, and I can take the manuals, pull in the teachers that I want to work with, and then also be the main teacher for the trainings and teach at the festivals. And I had wanted to be a traveling yoga teacher. So this was a lot of great visibility for me as well, too. So I left, which was, and little did I know when I left YogaWorks, all the grieving that I would have to do that came with it. Like you're really closing a chapter. And I went over to Wanderlust, and it was actually quite challenging. Wanderlust has they run their business much different than the way YogaWorks ran their business. So I had to get used to that. I would say maybe a quarter of my students followed me. In the beginning, a lot of students followed me, but because the organization wasn't there at Wanderlust, I really lost a lot of students in that transition. So I learned a lot. I think if anything, I learned a lot about business. And one thing I loved about Wanderlust that I wasn't getting from YogaWorks was everybody thought like an entrepreneur. And it put me in a place where I was no longer a big fish in a small pond. I was a small fish in a giant pond. But a lot of these yoga teachers were business people, and they all had their own teacher trainings, and they all fought for themselves. They ran their business. And so I learned a lot there, and I grew a lot there. And that really gave me the momentum. I only stayed there for 2.5 years, but to go out and start the School of Yoga.
Wow. What a big transition. And also, I feel like you're so great at keeping great relationship with all the places that you have worked for, or different connections you made, that people keep inviting you back to come teach again, or come teach a workshop or training here and there. And I feel like that's something that I can see in you.
Yeah. And, and I will say that I think that's really important advice, is that was something that was really important to me, to not leave YogaWorks and be ungrateful and be angry. I mean, every relationship comes to an end. And I remember sitting down, and what I did was I didn't do it by email. I wanted to meet with each teacher in person, with like the teacher training department in person. And I actually met with Phil Swain, who was the owner at YogaWorks. And, I told them all, like, there's a point where you have to go and you have to grow. And it's nothing personal, but I'm just not growing anymore, and I need to evolve. And because I left on good terms, a year later, they still had me come back and teach for their trainings. And I think that's where I met you. And here I am teaching at their competitor, and I'm still like teaching advanced asana in the YogaWorks teacher training.
Yes, I remember that's where I met you, was in my 300-hour teacher training. Yeah. You came to teach a weekend module of advanced asana. And yeah, I think you continued to teach like a small weekend workshop or trainings there as well, that I remember signing up for. So I think that is such a great quality, and also something like I can definitely learn from watching you, and hopefully the listeners as well. I guess just slightly going back, when you're teaching so many 200 hours for YogaWorks, how many a year were you teaching in average? How many 200-hour teacher training?
In the beginning, I was teaching sometimes 3. I was teaching a lot. And then when I started doing the 300-hour, and literally to this day, I'm teaching 1 200-hour a year now, but normally, especially before the pandemic, it was 2 200 hours a year plus 2 300 hours a year. So I've always had like 4 trainings.
Wow. So yeah. A lot of training. So, and you were also still teaching group classes in between. So I'm sure that was a lot on your schedule to balance.
Yeah, but when I left YogaWorks, I was down to 5 classes, because it would like YogaWorks, I had a full-time job. I had 5 classes plus 4 trainings, and then I would do my own retreats. So, but I was really making good money as a yoga teacher. And then when I went to Wanderlust, I dropped down to 4 classes. And right now that's my max. And like in Europe right now, because I'm teaching training after training after training, I only have 1 group class. Mm-hmm. But like in LA, if I'm not doing so many trainings, I'll go to 3 or 4. But 4 is my max.
Mm-hmm. And do you think keeping a group classes, as somebody like at your level of teaching so many trainings and traveling, making sure you always are teaching, even if it's 1 or 4 group classes, are crucial and important part of being a full-time teacher?
Yeah, 100%. 1, you really connect to your students in a group class. I mean, this is what really everything boils down to: practice. And so if you can be there week after week after week for your students' practice, you're transforming their lives. And, it's just in these daily things that they're doing. Also, there was a point where I wasn't teaching group classes, and I did notice my retreats and training numbers dropped, because that is a really good feed into your bigger things. It's the group classes.
Yeah.
And it keeps you on your toes teaching group classes. If not, you're regurgitating the same thing over and over again. Like, especially as a traveling teacher, when I go into markets, a lot of times I'm just teaching the fundamentals. Like, not everybody understands the foundations the way we understand it in LA. And part of what keeps me evolving are those group classes in LA. I mean, those students keep me on my toes and keep my sequencing transforming, make me explore different ways to approach different poses.
Yeah. When did you start doing your own thing, like start offering your own trainings and veering off from studio, being hired by studio to do these things, but you starting to do your own retreats and trainings? And how did that start to happen?
Well, Wanderlust, because Wanderlust had given me even more of a launching pad, just with that strong brand behind, and I had a title, and then also I was teaching at the festivals. My traveling had really started to increase, and I found the more I cut my group classes, I had more space in my schedule to design trainings, to be on the computer, and to design weekend workshops. So I started traveling a lot more, and that was kind of like the deciding factor. I was like, when I was at YogaWorks, I would say most of my money was I was being paid by YogaWorks. And when I went to Wanderlust, it was like 50-50. And then I had to get to a place where more of that was the income that I was making on my own. And so that's when I left Wanderlust. And then interestingly enough, things got very quiet for me that year. It was 2018. And that's when I met my partner, Fitzjoy. But it gave me a chance to relax, unplug from the corporate machines, and also think about how I wanted to create my own thing. And that was really important for me because I just didn't want to regurgitate the YogaWorks training and regurgitate what I learned at Wanderlust. So it was kind of like I had like a good solid 9 months. I was still teaching, but it was just quieter. And then I did my first teacher training in Goa at the end of 2018. And it was a small training. I think there was only like 9 of us. And you had come when there was like a huge crowd. But that was like, that training was really planting a seed, and I was getting my feet wet. And then I started really more like 2019, I started developing my 200 hour. And then interestingly enough, Christina, who did my first YogaWorks 200 hour teacher training in 2010, she was the one who ran this yoga studio, and she had left the Philippines. She moved to New Zealand, but she wanted to do a 300 hour program in the Philippines. And she kind of had a feeling this would be their last training. And this was right before the pandemic kicked in. And so we decided to do this 300 hour training called the School of Yoga. And she's great with admin. She did all the curriculum for Yoga Alliance. And then I'm the one who put the whole training together. So that's really where the School of Yoga was born. And it was Christina who helped me get it certified, put it on the books, get it branded. And then it wasn't until the pandemic where we went into this online platform. And I pulled in teachers like Annie and Marla Apt and Jean Heilemann. And so this School of Yoga started to really grow and evolve in more of my perspective.
Ah, that's so amazing, because I started hearing and noticing School of Yoga probably around the pandemic time, but this has already started way before, well, not way, but a few years before that.
Yeah. So you see how these seeds are always planted.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to the pandemic. So like, what was your life like before the pandemic of teaching and traveling and leading trainings? And how did the pandemic have an impact on your teaching career? And then now that we're out of it, how has it shifted since the pandemic?
Well, I was traveling like a crazy person. I mean, it was almost like, yay, I have my freedom. And my partner also is a tour manager. So I was like on the road. I mean, we were just always, I was barely in LA. And so all of a sudden that was like a big abrupt stop where we both had to be home, for a long period of time. But, because I had made all these contacts from 10 years of traveling around the world. When I started the online Zoom classes, once again, that flowed easily. And then I decided to start running these modules that were under the School of Yoga, because I had done like 30 200 hour teacher trainings in my life. And I needed a 300 hour program so these students can get their 500 hours. I knew that there was no way I could teach the whole 300 hour. And I was also having issues, I was like, okay, who can I get to teach with me? So I went up. I actually asked my teachers like Annie and Marla and Lisa Walford, Jean Heileman, who's not my teacher, but she's more of a colleague. And they all said yes. I couldn't believe it. And so that's where this idea came from, that students have the availability to study with each of us teachers, and they can work towards their 300 hours. So yeah, and the pandemic was actually a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. So it kind of almost forced you to slow down from all the traveling, but that kind of gave you time to really start building this curriculum in the school that you have built.
And the online platform. I would have never invested so much time and energy in the online platform if it wasn't because of the pandemic.
Yeah. And it just makes so much sense for your school because you have traveled so much for so many years teaching at a different part of the world to have this online aspect into your teaching, your school, because then, your students from Asia, your student from Europe, and your students from New Zealand or Australia, they can all join in on some of the online trainings. They can join in on your online like weekly classes. But then there's also this in-person aspect of you can still come together in person and do this training. So I feel like it's such an amazing school that you have built.
Thank you. And I really wanted to align it with a sense of the way yoga was passed down to me. I mean, you could see the time that I came in, and the yoga world has completely changed. And I wanted to let students know you can really get something that's authentic and real here. So that was my main intention for this whole.
And now Center for Yoga partnering or collaborating with you to offer that 300. I feel like it's just like made a full big circle.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, how amazing.
I'm doing a 300-hour there. And that was my hour. Yeah. And I think if anything, I'm a very good example of I never set out to be a traveling yoga teacher. I really was just someone that liked to practice. And that's what was always more important to me, the lifestyle of yoga, being authentic to the practice. And the rest is all through connections and just, keeping good relationships with people. But everything, has come full circle for sure. And the fact that I'm working with Lisa Walford, who was my 200-hour teacher training, I mean, it's really surreal, And if anything, I'm always learning more and more and more. I think that's what really keeps me excited on the path.
Yeah, for sure. I think whenever I have a teacher that I really look up to, and you being included in that teacher that I really look up to, I feel like these teachers I look up to they never stop learning. They're always learning. They're always investing in their practice and also their continuing education. And I feel like I can tell when teacher kind of stopped learning. There's a stagnancy that I can feel. Whereas somebody like you or Annie, like I know that you two are continuing to learn and adapt and refine your teaching and your practices. And that shows in your teachings.
Thank you. Thank you.
And how has it, now that we're out of the pandemic, is there any changes that you made from like before the pandemic? Life was too hectic, so I need to maybe change it a little bit now. Maybe you chose to travel less or work less number of hours. I don't know what it is, but is there any changes that you made since the pandemic?
Well, actually, right now, that's a good question. My schedule is very steady. I'm not flying to Europe, flying to Asia, coming back to LA. It's very much, and I have a certain amount of time where I'm just not on an airplane. And also, I'm going through menopause. And when you go through menopause, my effects are more like I'm drying out. Like I can feel it in my joints. I'm thirsty a lot, my sleep. So I have to really manage my vata. And so my partner and I, we bought a place in Europe. He's Belgium. And so he wanted to be close to his family. So right now, my main markets are Europe and Los Angeles. And so LA, of course, I mean, I've been there forever, and we're doing the 300-hour Center for Yoga. But also when I come to Europe, I stay here for 3 months, and Brussels is in the middle of Europe. So I just take a train or a plane, and then I can really come back and build my ojas. And then in the beginning of the year, I usually always go back to India or Nepal. I mean, that's just my dedications are there, and I take students. And then this year I went to Australia. Next year I'll go to New Zealand. So I kind of, just alternate with that. So yeah, it's pretty steady.
And it's more of a slower travel that you're doing where you're not just hopping from one place to the next. But when you come to Europe, you stay for a month or two or several months. And when you 3 months, and when you come back to LA, you're back for a couple of months. So it's more grounding for you.
Yeah, generally 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, and then maybe India and Nepal, that section, 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like my big travel. And I'm also investing in markets. Maybe once or twice a year, I might have 2 new markets. But now I'm really kind of going back to the markets where I have students. So it's easy for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know a lot of people listening to this podcast and also who knows you already. I feel like a lot of yoga teachers look up to you and be like, how can I create a lifestyle like Joan of traveling and teaching, but having these like beautiful communities in all these places that you do teach at? And also balancing owning your own business and still teaching. Because there's a lot of admin work and hours on a computer that goes into running your own business and balancing still that with teaching in front of people and also having your own practice. So is there anything that you learned along the way of this journey, this beautiful journey of yoga path that you want to share with the listeners or the teachers listening of, I don't know, any wisdoms?
Yeah, know your skill set. I think really understanding your dharma is really important. All of us have different paths that we walk. And obviously, my path is teaching. And don't be afraid to pay someone to help you because you can't handle everything. I mean, I don't have the time to sit and try to figure out all this technology, AI. Like I just don't. And so I do pay Tina to help me out. And I have somebody else that runs my website. So I have kind of a little team that really helps me out. And I think, know what your offerings are. Like for me, having this Iyengar Ashtanga background, I'm not a one-hit wonder as far as teaching. It usually takes students a few times to really practice with me, to really understand the benefits of what I'm trying to teach, because I'm teaching a very sophisticated form of yoga. So I know that I need to focus on certain markets and build certain students, as opposed to kind of, you see this with a lot of influencers. They kind of do this market, they do this market, they do this ad. And so that's not me. And I think the more you can get specific on what your niche is, I think that's how you develop your market, and that's how you develop your success as a yoga teacher too.
Yeah, those are such a good point. And I've noticed in my teaching too, I feel like how I practice or how I like to teach, having you or Annie as my teachers, it's different than what's popular per se in LA. Like sometimes like loud music and like almost like dancing, like creative sequencing. I feel like that is kind of what's popular now. And I feel like sometimes it's hard to, like you said you're slow burn. Like some students have to work with you several times to really get the benefit and really see like, oh my God, I'm learning so much from this teacher. So yeah, I think not getting too swayed by what is quote unquote popular right now and kind of staying really true to what I believe is a good quality teaching has been a great learning experience for me and also a challenge at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, because not everybody's going to like your style. Not everybody's going to get it. But the more you kind of understand who you cater to, you direct your energy towards the stuff that works. Don't waste your energy comparing yourself to other people. Okay.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I guess this is more of my own questions that I have that I'm after assisting Annie and kind of embarking more on, like she wants me to start leading Smart Flow teacher trainings. And because I just feel like a lot of teachers that I look up to, including you, have assisted way more trainings before they actually got up to teach their own. So part of me feels like I want to assist more. I need more trainings. I need more education. I need more mentorship before I can do it. And since you've kind of been on this path for a long time, any advice for maybe teacher in my shoes who's are kind of embarking towards the direction of wanting to become a teacher trainer? Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty and also maybe a little bit of doubt or fear there for me.
You're always going to have doubt. When I did my first teacher training, I had a lot of doubt. I mean, I remember I sat there and read the whole 300-page manual. And when it really came down to it, I had to let that go and just teach from my experience. And you're never going to be fully ready because the head is always going to question. So, especially your first teacher training, it's like being a parent. You just have to do it. And then your third and fourth teacher training, it's like your second kid. You start to be a little bit more confident with it because you're teaching more from experience. But you just have to be easy on yourself and give yourself a little flexibility to mess up and just stick to teaching what you know. Okay. And a lot of times that really is just sharing your experience of yoga, and you just have to go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I'll definitely be listening to that part over again when when I'm listening to this podcast again. No, I really appreciate that. For you, what does success mean to you as a yoga teacher?
That's a good question because it's changed. I think I'm in a much more calm part of my life. Success is having a well-rounded life, having love. I mean, I just went through an ordeal with my partner. I almost lost my partner. But I think this is also really important with teaching too, to have a life outside of teaching. And then to just wake up every day and just be grateful and happy to do what you do for a living. Yeah, I mean, the financial part of it, if you can make enough money to support yourself, that's also success. But I know a lot of people that make a ton of money and they're not happy. So I think success is really just feeling abundant on every level, health wise, relationship wise. You like where you live. That's so important. And also, you love what you do for a living. I mean, because we're going to be doing this for the rest of our life. We want to make sure that we really love it and we get excited for it.
Yeah, it's so true. The thought that came to me was you said having life outside of teaching. And that's something I've noticed last year in myself was that I didn't really have hobbies so much anymore because I love what I do to teach yoga and practice yoga and take trainings, but almost got so deep in it that I stopped or I forgot to do things that's outside of yoga that brings me joy. So that's something I'm working on a little bit more this year, trying to, I don't know, maybe take art classes or take on different, activity or sports or something where it's not just yoga that I do. And I think that's definitely important.
Yeah, especially for the longevity of it too. Yeah.
Yeah. And another question I had was, where do you see your future going? Or is there a goal or a direction that you want to take your teaching career or your school of yoga towards? Is there anything that you're hoping to brew up or plan and manifest?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked with this idea with my partner. I would like to open a retreat center. I mean, I've done like a healing center, and I feel like I know so many people, so many teachers. For Fitzjoy and I, it would actually give us a chance to be more settled. That I could run my stuff there. I mean, I think I'll always travel. I'll always have a market in LA. I'll always have places I go to in Europe. But I really, I think as I get older, I want to settle a lot more. And then I can also, something else I'm really passionate about is having other teachers work and do their thing too. And it would be great for me to have a space where other teachers like yourself can come. You could bring your community. And of course, in this retreat center, there's also going to be a healing community. So it would be yoga, but also beyond, like, sustainable living, really good organic food, sound baths. I mean, everything kind of all plugged into this one place. So that would be a dream come true.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a amazing dream, and I'm sure it'll happen. Do you have a place in mind where you want to do it, or I don't know, part of the world?
Europe. I mean, California is great, but California is, it's quite expensive. There's a lot of ropes you have to jump through. I love Europe. And I think Europe is a great place to grow old. It's quiet, it's calm, it's easy here.
Well, I'll be really excited for that when that's happened. Is there any other questions that I didn't ask, or any topic that I didn't get to that you want to share with the listener?
I guess you didn't ask me what I do in my free time. What are my hobbies outside of yoga?
Yes. What do you do for your free time?
I like to cook. I'm very interested in, I cook plant-based, but, just really great high quality food. I also am learning French. That's been a project of mine forever. And, I started taking a Pilates reformer class. Like I'm really into like this idea of getting strong again. So yeah, those are kind of like my three things I do outside of yoga.
Oh, those sounds good. Cooking and then also Pilates and learning French. I also really committed to becoming more serious about learning Spanish this
Yeah.
past 4 months when I was in Peru, and I had a tutor and I did like private 1 week intensive lessons as well. And yeah, I feel like that's such a great way to challenge your brain too, to learn a new language, and doing something new that we're beginner at is, I think, so important for.
Helps the neuroplasticity. And that's the thing with teaching. Sometimes you become so good at teaching because you've just been doing it forever where you're not really evolving. So when I take French, I feel like a total beginner. I'm fumbling over my words, but it's good. It's good for me.
Yes, so true. Well, thank you so much, Joan. And please tell the listener how they can find you. If you have any upcoming offering you want to share with everybody, just any plug.
So my website's School of Yoga. My Instagram is Joan Hyman School of Yoga. Same with Facebook, Joan Hyman School of Yoga. As of right now, I'm doing a European tour right now. So if you're in Europe, I have a bunch of trainings and some workshops you can participate in. In March, I'm doing a 2-week retreat to Nepal. It's a 5-day retreat and then a 5-day trek. And then I'm also doing a 100-hour training. It's a retreat style training in this amazing retreat center in the Austrian Alps. And it's also a detox center. The food is all vegan, organic. It's a stellar place. The shallow amazing. And that's in June of next year. And I'm doing the 300-hour training in LA with the School of Yoga and Center for Yoga. And that'll start in May next year.
Okay. A lot of exciting things coming up. So exciting. Well, thank you so much, Joan, for your time. I really appreciate having this conversation, and I'm sure everyone listening to it will really get so much out of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Reika. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this podcast episode. Like I said, this episode and this conversation was very special to me because I got to speak to my teacher that I really look up to and I highly respect. And, speaking to her for this podcast interview, and also knowing that you all get to hear her journey and her stories, I was very inspired, and I hope you are also inspired from her stories. It's just amazing what she has built for herself. And there's so many aspects of her teaching career that I really admire and look up to. And I think a lot of yoga teachers that I know of that knows Joan, we all look up to her for amazing yoga business, yoga career she has built for herself. And I know that didn't come easy for her. She worked really hard, and like you heard her say, she really prioritized her practice and her learning. She respects her teachers, and she really wanted to create this authentic, true yoga school that offers high quality knowledge and skills. And that is exactly what you're going to get in her trainings and her school. So if you get a chance, take her class. She teaches at Center for Yoga in LA when she is back in LA. She also hosts amazing yoga retreats all over the world. So if you're looking for yoga retreats, check out her website and see all the list of yoga retreats she offers. Every year she offers countless of retreats. I'm sure you'll find something that works for you in the future, and you will not regret joining her yoga retreat. She is amazing. So that is it for me. I do want to remind you about the Art of Teaching Private Yoga workshop with Brittany that's coming up in November 3rd. Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. California time. Link is on the bio, as well as 2 anniversary celebrations that I'll be hosting, one online and one in person in Long Beach. Both are free to attend. Just register on the link on my bio, and donations are welcome, which is going to help with the cost of organizing this event, but not required. So that is it. I hope I get to see you or hear from you in any possible way. You can always reach out to me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @ReikaYoga, and my website is www.reikayoga.com. I hope you have a great day, and I'll speak to you next week.